Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the foundational concepts of psychology. When a lot of people hear that word, they instantly picture mind reading, right? Or maybe someone analyzing dreams on a vintage leather couch. Well, we're going to totally transform that perception right now. We're looking at psychology for what it truly is, the rigorous, highly structured, and honestly, incredibly fascinating science of us. So, here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll start by decoding the mind and behavior, then dig into the roots of psychology. After that, we'll explore 10 major schools of thought, look at how researchers actually do their work, and finally, see how psychology operates in the real world.
All right, kicking things off with decoding mind and behavior. To really get this, we have to completely shift how we think about what this field actually studies.
By definition, psychology is the science of behavior and mental processes, and the crucial takeaway here is that it systematically measures two very distinct things. First, you've got overt behaviors. These are the actions you can literally see, like someone smiling or running or shouting. But then it also measures the covert, internal processes, the stuff that's totally invisible to the naked eye, Things like thinking, remembering, and feeling. Now, when scientists actually start collecting all this data, they basically take one of two paths. The nomothetic approach looks at the big picture. Think of it like looking at the entire forest. They're trying to establish general laws of mental processes that apply to all of us. The idiographic approach, on the other hand, zeroes in completely on the individual. It assumes that you are wonderfully unique, and you can only really be understood by looking at your specific environment. It's essentially studying one beautifully complex tree instead of the whole forest.
Moving on to the roots of psychology. Now that we know what it is, let's look at how it actually evolved from ancient philosophy into a hard empirical science. This evolution actually builds pretty quickly across human history. All the way back in 4 BCE, Greek philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were already deeply pondering the mind. Fast forward a bit to the 16th century, and the word psychologia is officially coined in Latin. But the real game changer? That happened in 1879. That's when Wilhelm Wundt established the very first experimental psychology laboratory in Germany, officially breaking the field away from philosophy. And just 4 years later, his student G. Stanley Hall set up the first U.S. lab over at Johns Hopkins University.
So why did this massive split from philosophy even happen? Well, it all comes down to empiricism, a concept championed by English philosopher John Locke. Empiricism basically demanded that researchers stop just sitting around debating ideas and start gathering objective, observable data. It argues that our senses, what we can actually hear, see, taste, and touch, are the only legitimate sources of valid information. Without this absolute demand for hard evidence, psychology literally couldn't be called a science.
Okay, let's look at the 10 schools of thought. Over the years, this rigorous push for empirical data led to entirely different ways of viewing the exact same human behaviors.
This is a massive turning point in our story. Instead of viewing the major schools of psychology as these competing sets of facts, think of them as different lenses. You've got structuralism, trying to break the mind down into its basic elements, while functionalism argues, hey, it's way more important to look at how the mind actually adapts to the real world. Then there's Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis, which shifts the lens entirely to the unconscious mind. And that directly contrasts with behaviorists like Pavlov and Watson, who completely ignored the unconscious to study only observable behavior. And as you move through the rest of the list, from the humanistic focus on free will, to the cognitive computer processor view, all the way to the biological and evolutionary perspectives, just remember, every single one of these lenses is just trying to solve the incredibly complex puzzle of human behavior, just from a totally different angle.
Next up, how psychologists actually conduct research. Because how do these different schools of thought prove their theories without just, guessing?
Well, psychologists rely on 3 main research methods, all bound by really strict ethical guidelines to ensure valid studies and, of course, to rigorously protect the participants involved. First, you have descriptive methods. This is simply observing natural behavior, like doing a deep dive case study or sending out a massive survey. Second is the experimental method. This is the heavy hitter for finding cause and effect. It's where you manipulate specific variables under highly controlled laboratory conditions to see exactly what happens. And third is the correlational method. This one is used when scientists want to understand the statistical relationship between 2 existing variables, like, say, birth order and ambition, without actually manipulating anything themselves.
Finally, let's talk about psychology in the real world. We've covered the history and the theories, but where does all this research actually live and breathe in our modern society?
First things first, we absolutely have to clear up a super common misconception regarding career paths, the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. A psychologist holds a doctorate degree, like a PhD, and has highly specialized training to assess behavior, conduct research, and provide therapy. A psychiatrist, on the other hand, is a medical doctor who not only diagnoses disorders, but is legally authorized to prescribe medication to treat the biological symptoms of those disorders. It's an absolutely crucial distinction.
And this really illustrates just how unbelievably vast the application of this science is today. You might just picture a clinical psychologist treating mental disorders. But truthfully, psychologists are absolutely everywhere. You'll find organizational psychologists in corporate boardrooms trying to optimize productivity, physiological psychologists in high-tech labs mapping brain behavior, health psychologists in hospitals, and even forensic psychologists working deep inside the criminal justice system. The science of the mind touches literally every single aspect of human life.
Now, before we wrap up this explainer, let's test your historical knowledge with a quick trivia question drawn directly from our source material. Where did the formal study of psychology first start in India? Take a second, think about it.
Okay, if you guessed the University of Calcutta, you are absolutely correct. It's such a great reminder of how this discipline expanded globally to establish deep academic roots everywhere. From those early days, psychology in India has rapidly modernized, heavily influencing contemporary health, education, and organizational sectors across the entire country today.
To cap off our exploration today, I want to leave you with this thought. We've covered the history, the scientific rigor, and the vast applications of psychology. But when you examine your own actions, your own thoughts, and your choices today, which of the scientific lenses we covered makes the most sense to you? Do you feel driven by your biology, your social culture, your unconscious mind, or your own free will? It's a seriously fascinating question to ask yourself as you go about your day. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the science of us.